Galt Sternwheeler Society was formed when, Elliot?
This fall, after the actual first event. The first event, which took place last summer, was actually organized by the Historic Trails Association of Alberta. And since then, the original crews and members of the entourage that went to Medicine Hat have decided to form a society to perpetuate the event and invite the public to join.
Okay. I guess one of the big questions that would come up, Charles, is I'm not sure I can put the expense into a boat to get it ready for the next Sternwheeler Challenge. Does it have to be a big, expensive venture?
No, that's one thing that we do want to stress, is that boats can be very simple. There's only one requirement, that the stern wheel, or it can be a paddle wheel, or a paddle wheel, let's say, has to be operative. It could be side wheeler, it can be a stern wheeler, but it has to operate. We have one member that made a very simple boat, and it's as valid as any of them. And the whole thing is just to have fun, get out and get on the river. Let's have fun.
And reenact.
And reenact. And the boat, if you do build one, or if someone builds one, they can use it for a pleasure craft. It's not only for this event, so it definitely is not a loss.
We were talking about the fact that were there any boats that sunk? And you said, yes, there is apparently one. There's some different stories about it, but they're right below the high-level grade.
The original
The
boat.
original Sternwheeler.
Yes, it didn't actually, it sunk, it was beached. After they were abandoned, when the railroad was put through, then these boats were abandoned. There's an interesting account written by one of the early day pioneers of this area, a gentleman that was on the river boat, and he talks about going to Medicine Hat on the boat in 24 hours. Now, we find that to be a little exaggeration, but let's say that this is what he says. But it took 3 weeks to get back, and they had to dig coal out of the seams along the way and pull the boats back. Coming upstream is, going down is arduous, but going up is extremely difficult.
Yes, I would imagine so.
There is some pretty rapid areas.
Of course, the fuel would be coal that was used at that time.
Yes, yes, and they were hauling coal.
That's right.
Yes.
Which would be very accessible as well. Okay, we have some more slides to look at. And let's continue this discussion, gentlemen. Here we are, back on the river. The Sternwheeler Challenge. Okay. It looks like things are going relatively smoothly here, gentlemen.
That shot is taken from one of the bridges near Lethbridge here, I believe. And I think that is our boat, the Coulee Queen. That could also be the Voyageur.
It isn't our boat because it doesn't have the stack coming through.
Is that someone standing in the river, or is that something that's just there?
I think that's one of the crew members standing there, wondering what to do next.
Oh dear. Okay.
The water is only ankle deep in places or less.
That's very deceiving then. I was hoping that it would be one of the brighter spots. But you did have some perils along the way, Charles.
Yes, we encountered, well, we had a collision in the rapids with one of the other participants. We ran aground many times where we would have to get out and push manually, and of course that was in keeping with what happened 100 years ago. They pulled the boats in, we just got out and pushed. As you can see, this is leaving Tabor and the campsite at Tabor, and as you can see that we're getting underway there. I believe that's Tabor, isn't it?
Well, it is. I think that's where your dog followed us, and when we turned around to come back upstream and bring the dog back to the campsite, the current was so swift in the narrows there that we couldn't make headway against it.
The dog walked along beside us, treading water, just walking, you know.
The river looks awfully wide in places.
You can just barely see on the left side of the photo there where there's a gravel bar.
Yes.
And the river channel is quite wide, but the left part of the river there is very shallow.
Where was the river so wide that you felt it was almost like a lake?
In between Tabor and Bow Island, there's a stretch where the slope of the river is very gentle and it's just perfectly calm. You can't even detect a current.
Here's a good shot.
Yes.
That's the Voyageur. That was one of the entries, which I believe from talking to one of the crew members on the weekend that they are reconstructing their boat, they're refitting it, and they'll be in the event next year as well.
All right, and this one?
This is an excellent example of good, simple construction. This was Charlie Shepard built this. Charlie is by occupation a customs broker, and his boat is called the Gopher Broker. And it's actually very much like a stone boat that you would mix mortar or cement in. It's actually built of two 8-foot sections, and you can see along the center of the boat there where there's a reinforcing piece that attaches them firmly together.
Yes.
And it had a very unique power plant. It had an antique John Deere 1.5 horsepower pump engine with big flywheels and a flat belt drive. But Charlie built the boat for a minimal cost, and it was eminently seaworthy. It worked beautifully, and this is a good example of what can be done for people who want to participate in the event.
And are a little bit inventive.
Right.
Again, it looks awfully cold, gentlemen. Was this one of the days that the storm came down upon you?
I see that I have my jacket on there. I think that must have been the case.
Yes, it was. Most of the days, I believe, you needed jackets. There were some sunny periods. We hope that the weather will be a little more cooperative this year. But
this was in July?
yes.
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 The wind really howls through that river valley. In places we went through waves that were, 1.5 feet, perhaps even some of them were 2 feet high.
Oh, really?
At one point, when we changed off shifts, Charles was at the helm and I was engineering the boat, and I went up front to the wheel and took the wheel of the boat to steer, and I had a raincoat on and it was flapping back in the wind and getting caught in the fan for the engine. So while I was pulling the raincoat around myself and tying it up, I wasn't paying attention to where we were going, and by the time I looked up again, we were heading straight for the shore in just a matter of, a few seconds.
Yes. And this one?
This one was constructed prior to the event, actually, and it was not constructed for the event. And this fellow has used this boat in various lakes and whatever. It's quite an elaborate machine, and possibly not something that the average person would be interested in getting.
Actually, it looks like there's a little dwelling on there as well.
It is a houseboat.
It's a houseboat.
And he, as Charles was mentioning before, he has used this boat for several years as a pleasure craft.
Well, what would he use as fuel? Is that a fuel tank that we see there?
It has a gasoline engine on it, I think a Toyota or Datsun engine.
Mm-hmm. Were there any times that you were really in danger of injuring yourself on this trip at all?
We didn't feel there was any real danger. The thing is that the river is not very deep in most places. Very few places it is deep. In fact, as it was said, that in some places it only gives lubrication. It doesn't really give flotation. And so there's not much danger in that. I think that any sensible person can go down the river without any danger, and a great adventure. Of course, it's been suggested, you were speaking of the weather earlier, and it's been suggested that we would be better advised to pick a more appropriate time for, let's say, a better weather or something.
But how do you pick
We feel
that?
it's a challenge.
Sure.
We feel that that's what it is, and we also are celebrating an historical event that did take place on this time, at this date. And we think that that is important, too.
Stay with the original date.
Right. If we wanted to, let's say, just a super pleasure trip, we might go out to Park Lake or somewhere like that and ride around. But this is an adventure. It is an adventure.
What went through your minds, gentlemen, as you were traveling down the river and there was this reenactment, and you know that, in fact, other Sternwheelers back in the 18th century did the very same thing. What went through your minds?
We discussed that fact. We were thinking, I remember saying to Potts and to Charles, I says, how long has it been since somebody came down this river on a paddle wheel boat? And as close as we figured, since the original boats ran, it was probably approximately 98 years. The second day of our journey was actually the 100th anniversary of the launching of the Baroness, which was one of the original boats. And well, other thoughts that we had were just, this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, are we in southern Alberta? Why do people travel so far from their hometown and their country to have fun and to see scenery? Because you just go down into the river valley, the shapes of the coulees are beautiful, the water is nice, there's pelicans, there's ducks, there's beaver in the river. It's just a marvelous holiday.
All right, we're back here to our slides. Was this the end of the journey?
This is at Medicine Hat, and the man in the Levi's and the cap is Mayor Ted Grimm of Medicine Hat, and that's Bruce Haig in the red jacket presenting the shovel to him. It was an engraved, suitably engraved shovel. We have a pick that we engraved and is here in the city of Lethbridge, and the shovel was taken to Medicine Hat along with 25 pounds of coal that each vessel carried and presented to them as a historical tribute or whatever you might call it.
Right.
And again, the meeting at the Hat. And the Hat, the people of the Hat put on a dinner for all the crews, and sundry backup personnel and whatever, and took everyone out to a nice dinner.
Now, this wasn't a race. It wasn't who could get there the fastest. No. It was simply
we
go
want
through
to be sure that that is clear, that it is not a race.
All
it's
right.
a challenge of and a refreshing experience. I know when I got through with my 3 days on there, I was really more relaxed than I would be on a 2-week vacation in some other locale.
This is an interesting book that you brought along. It's the Old West, the Rivermen, and of course it talks about sternwheelers, paddle boats, American boats as well, but certainly the love of the boat and the men that took part.
Some of the men that captained those boats were real individuals,
Yes.
real characters. This is part of a Time Life series of books. I only have actually the one, but this one is particularly interesting on the riverboats.
Did you read this first?
No, I actually got that after we had run the actual event.
Okay.
The real problem is to find Canadiana things. Everything we run into, of course, seems to be American. The American people have always promoted their history so well, whereas we haven't. And this
we have to do it again.
We need
and
to
we're
do it.
out of time. But for further information, telephone number to call?
They could call myself at 328-8888.
Okay. Or leave a message here and we'll pass it along. Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you.
Sternwheeler Challenge.